We're joined now by Yasmine Ahmed, the UK Director of Human Rights Watch, and former Army officer and chemical weapons expert, Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. We spoke to him a couple of weeks ago to talk more about the siege. Firstly, Hamish, why are the Russian forces targeting Mariupol in particular?
Well, I think, as you said earlier, it's such a key place down in the south there. It links up to the Crimea. It's a port as well. And it's one of the key places that is resisting. And we're seeing horrific scenes straight out of the playbook of Syria that I described last week, using these horrific tactics. And dare I say, the Mariupol theatre that was attacked, had the words of children outside it. From my experience of being up against the Russians in Syria, that to them, that is probably why they targeted it. They are trying to terrify those civilians into surrendering. And that's why they go to it, as well as some of the horrendous other things. We're seeing all these fires. That's a classic tactic from Syria, set fire to towns and villages to run people out almost like vermin. Sadly, the tactics that the Russians are using, that they practiced, that sounds a terrible word to say, practiced in Syria, we're now seeing them all now, and there is really no end to it. And just one other thing, you've said how the military is stalled elsewhere in Ukraine because they've just got bogged down. I'm really concerned that the Russians might go on to the next stage of dreadfulness again from the Syrian playbook, so using some of their irregular weapons like chemical weapons, like incendiary weapons, and of course, ultimately, possibly tactical and nuclear weapons too.
Well, I want to pick up with you in more detail in a moment. But Yasmine, deliberately targeting a theatre in the knowledge that there are children there, that's a war crime, isn't it? Joe Biden, US president, said so.
Yes, well, certainly, if it's a deliberate attack on a civilian object or civilian infrastructure, then it is a war crime. And what it appears to be, as Hamish has noted and your coverage noted, that there were hundreds of civilians inside the theatre, and that it was very clearly marked that the civilians were there. It was in fact marked with children on either side. And there is no evidence to suggest that there was a military objective or target anywhere near it. And if that's the case, or if in fact it was disproportionate and deliberately attacked in that circumstance, then it is a war crime. And as we know, the ICC have opened an investigation, and these are certainly things that they will be looking at. We've also seen, in addition to that, the Russian authorities using cluster munitions as well, which are inherently indiscriminate and are banned under international law. And we've seen them being used against a hospital, a kindergarten, and civilians being killed as a result.
Hamish, being called a war criminal, will that do anything to stop Vladimir Putin?
No, I think not. Absolutely not at all. He has no concern for collateral damage, no concern for civilians either. He attacks hospitals, he attacks schools. Some of the hospitals that I supported in Syria, we had to give the grid references of those hospitals to the UN so that they would be protected. Those grid references were then given to the Syrians and the Russians. The next day, they were directly targeted with precision munitions. This is the morals, or the lack of morals. Putin has no scruples and no morals, and will use any tactics and any weapons to win. He's got two options here. With his army stalled, he could either sue for peace and negotiate ceasefires, or he can escalate. And I'm afraid I can't see anything but escalation at this stage.
And escalation because you have seen that in Syria. And escalation, as you said before, means chemical weapons and perhaps something worse.
Well, certainly in Syria, my experience of the siege of Aleppo, 4 years of conventional fighting, actually a town about the size of Mariupol, that the people resisted. But then we had 13 days of chlorine barrel bombs, chemical weapons, in December 2016, and the town fell. And without wanting to be too graphic, what happens is that the gas, heavier than air, goes underground where people are hiding, like they were hiding in this theatre. And it either kills them there or forces them above ground where they're captured or shot. And what I'm running a campaign at the moment is to educate civilians in Ukraine how to react in these circumstances so that chemical or biological or nuclear attack will not kill them and they can survive. And if Putin knows that these dreadful weapons will not be effective as they were in Syria, maybe perhaps he won't use them. So anything that you can do to help to get the message out, will really help people on the ground.
Okay. Yasmine, I guess the difficulty is how you get information to people in the city of Mariupol and how you hear what is going on for them. I mean, how do you get anything to them at this stage?
Yeah, well, it's very difficult. I mean, information is one thing, but as you noted, there's an effective siege on the city, which means that very, very basic necessities like medicine and food and water isn't being able to get in to Mariupol. So we are seeing devastating consequences of that, and that will continue. But as you note, it's also information. Human Rights Watch had spoken to a number of individuals who had left Mariupol just the day previous to the attack. And they had all noted that there were hundreds of people, including doctors, who'd mentioned that they had been providing supplies to people who were sheltering in the theatre. But it is very difficult for us to, even as Human Rights Watch and humanitarian organisations as well, to access, to get information and to be clear about what's happening. But I think certainly what we can be clear about is the devastation that we have seen that's been inflicted on civilians, and the need to ensure by both parties to the conflict that there is access to humanitarian necessities, and that civilians who want to leave should be able to do so. But that also, very importantly, does not mean that the Russian military has the right to target civilians that remain in Mariupol, even if they are provided a way of leaving. The laws of war and international law is very clear about the need to ensure the protection of civilians, which, as we have seen, is not happening in this circumstance.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking to you again. Thanks so much for your time. Yasmine Ahmed, the UK Director of Human Rights Watch, and Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, thanks very much for your time.